Welcome to our channel. Before we dive in, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, telling us where you're watching from. We'd love to hear your thoughts and keep the conversation going. Also share this video to your friends and loved ones and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. The morning sunlight spilled across the sleek glass walls of Hastings Enterprises, catching in the polished steel fixtures and making the entire floor gleam like something out of a luxury magazine spread. Mara Barnes walked through the main office with her usual calm efficiency, a neat folder pressed to her chest, her heels clicking a steady rhythm across the marble floor. Her stride was confident, though her pulse betrayed her nerves. She could feel the eyes that followed her, whispers floating in her wake like perfume. "Did you see them leaving together yesterday?" one voice murmured near the coffee station. "I swear he was smiling at her." "Theodore Hastings, smiling?" another whispered back, incredulous. Mara didn't need to linger to know exactly who they were talking about. It had been 2 months since her relationship with Theodore had begun, and despite their efforts at discretion, the office was an ecosystem of observation. No detail went unnoticed, not the way he held the elevator a second longer when she was running late, nor the way his eyes lingered on her when he thought no one was looking. She slipped into Theodore's office with a practiced knock, closing the door behind her. Inside, the man himself stood by the window, his jacket draped over the back of his chair, shirt sleeves rolled up, tie loosened in a way that was both careless and calculated. He turned as she entered, the faintest smile tugging at his lips. "You've been late precisely 0 times this week," he remarked, his tone deliberately casual. "I was beginning to wonder if I should give you a medal, or perhaps just extend your contract indefinitely." Mara arched a brow. "You mean I don't already have tenure as your overworked assistant?" She placed the folder on his desk, keeping her expression professional, though the corner of her mouth twitched. "Careful, Mr. Hastings. People might think you're playing favorites." His eyes glinted with mischief as he leaned against the desk, crossing his arms. "Oh, I do play favorites. I just happen to be particularly fond of my assistant. She's brilliant, efficient, and," his gaze dipped deliberately, "has the most infuriating habit of pretending she doesn't notice when the entire office is buzzing about us." Her pulse skipped, but she kept her voice steady. "And whose fault is that? You're the one who insists on holding elevator doors and glaring at anyone who dares to talk to me longer than 2 minutes. Security measures," he countered smoothly. "Necessary precautions." "Precautions against what?" she asked, folding her arms. "Against losing my assistant to the charms of men who don't deserve her attention." His tone was dry, but there was an edge beneath it, one she recognized all too well: jealousy. Mara shook her head, suppressing a laugh. "You do realize you're impossible, right?" "Frequently told," he said with mock solemnity, though his gaze softened as it lingered on her. For a moment, silence stretched between them, comfortable, weighted with everything unsaid. She felt it then, the danger of their situation. At the end of the day, he was her boss and she was his assistant. Every whisper in the office was a reminder that they were walking a tightrope. One wrong move and both their reputations could crumble. "I heard some of the gossip this morning," she admitted quietly, breaking the silence. "It's getting louder. People are starting to talk like it's not just speculation anymore." Theodore straightened, the smile fading into something more serious. He circled the desk and stopped in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her chin to meet his gaze. "Let them talk," he said, his voice low. "I'm not ashamed of being with you." Her breath caught. "It's not about shame. It's about appearances. I don't want anyone thinking I only got this job because of you. I've worked too hard to be dismissed as the boss's girlfriend." Something flickered across his face, an ache almost. "Mara," he murmured, "you were the best assistant I've ever had long before I had the good sense to kiss you. No one with half a brain could think otherwise." She searched his eyes, wanting to believe him, and hating that her pride warred with her heart. "Still," she said, forcing lightness back into her tone, "we should be careful. Discretion, remember?" His lips curved again, slow and deliberate. "Discretion, yes. Though I must warn you, I find it increasingly difficult to keep my hands to myself when you insist on looking like that at 8 in the morning." Mara swatted his arm with the folder. "Professional boundaries, Mr. Hastings." "Of course," he said, utterly unrepentant. "I'll keep my affections strictly limited to after business hours, unless provoked." "Provoked?" she repeated, laughing despite herself. Yes. For example, if my assistant keeps challenging me with that infuriatingly clever mouth of hers. Her cheeks warmed, and she turned briskly toward the door before he could see her smile. You have a meeting in 15 minutes. Try not to scandalize the staff before then. He caught her wrist lightly as she moved past, his voice dropping low enough to vibrate in her chest. Mara, let them whisper. At the end of the day, all I care about is that you're here. She met his gaze, saw the sincerity in his eyes, and for one dangerous moment she almost forgot where they were. Then the muffled sound of laughter drifted from the hall, and she pulled her hand free with a soft exhale. 15 minutes, she reminded him, her voice steady. As she left his office, closing the door behind her, the whispers picked up again. But this time, instead of shrinking beneath them, Mara found herself smiling. Let them talk, she thought. For once, the rumors weren't wrong. Airports had a way of making Mara feel small, no matter how many times she traveled. The sheer expanse of gleaming floors, the endless streams of travelers rushing with purpose. It was chaos disguised as order. Yet standing beside Theodore Hastings, chaos bent itself into submission. He strode through the terminal with unshakable confidence, perfectly pressed suit tailored to an inch of its life, his presence commanding enough that even airport staff paused to take notice. Mara kept pace beside him, tugging her carry-on with one hand and clutching her passport with the other. She dressed in what she considered travel professional, slim trousers, a crisp blouse, hair neatly tied back, but beside Theodore's effortless elegance she felt almost underdressed. You're staring, he said without turning his head, his mouth curving faintly. I'm not, Mara replied quickly, heat creeping up her neck. You are. He glanced at her then, eyes amused. I know the signs. Your brows pinch together slightly and you forget to blink. Maybe I was staring at the boarding gate, she countered, lifting her chin. His hum was low, disbelieving. The gate, of course. Fascinating things, gates. Almost as fascinating as your boss's impeccable taste in suits. She rolled her eyes, trying to smother a laugh. Do you ever get tired of your own ego? Never, he said smoothly, handing his passport to the attendant with a smile that was far too charming for her peace of mind. They settled into first class a short while later, the hum of the plane cocooning them in a kind of privacy that the office never allowed. Mara busied herself with buckling in, arranging her files, anything to avoid the awareness of Theodore beside her. He leaned back in his seat, long legs stretching with casual arrogance, watching her like she was the only entertainment worth having. You've packed work, he noted, eyeing the folder she pulled from her bag. Of course, she said, flipping it open. We're meeting with Alvarez Holdings tomorrow morning. I'd like to be prepared. You're always prepared, he murmured, his gaze softening. Sometimes I wonder if you know how much I rely on that. The admission caught her off guard, and for a heartbeat, the air between them thickened. She looked up, and their eyes met. His unusually unguarded, hers caught somewhere between pride and something more dangerous. Well, she said finally, retreating into briskness. Someone has to keep you from terrifying potential business partners. He smirked. I thought my reputation was half the draw. It is, she admitted with a grin, but only because I'm here to balance it. The plane took off, and as Madrid drew closer, their banter softened into easy conversation, drifting from business to books, from boardroom strategies to the quirks of foreign travel. Mara found herself laughing more than she expected, his wit disarming even when she tried to remain professional. It was dangerously easy to forget he was her boss and remember only that he was Theodore, the man who had kissed her breathless in the quiet of his penthouse, the man who could make her feel both infuriated and cherished in the same heartbeat. Hours later, when the wheels touched down in Madrid, Theodore's hand briefly brushed hers as they stood to disembark. It was nothing more than a fleeting contact, easily mistaken for accident. But the warmth of it lingered as they moved through customs and into the golden Spanish sunlight. Madrid was alive in a way that New York wasn't, warmer, louder, every street buzzing with laughter and music. From the back of the sleek black car sent by their local partners, Mara pressed her forehead lightly against the glass, drinking it in. Impressed? Theodore asked beside her, his tone knowing. It's beautiful, she admitted, unable to keep the awe from her voice. So much color, so much life. His gaze didn't leave her profile. It suits you. She turned, startled. What does? Madrid, he said simply. The vibrancy, the fire. You belong in places like this. Her throat tightened, and for once she found no clever retort. Instead, she looked away, focusing on the city unfurling before them. Their hotel was, of course, breathtaking. A historic palace turned luxury retreat, all marble floors and soaring chandeliers. Mara tried not to gape as they entered the lobby, but Theodore caught her expression and chuckled. Still pretending you're unimpressed? He teased, offering a hand as they mounted the steps. I'm perfectly professional, she said primly, though her eyes betrayed her wonder. Professionalism doesn't preclude appreciation, he murmured, his hand brushing the small of her back as he guided her toward the check-in desk. The gesture was subtle, but it sent a spark through her nonetheless. Once in her suite, separate from his of course, though she noted the adjoining door, Mara stood by the window, gazing out at the sun-drenched city. She could already feel the dual weight of the days ahead, the sharp edge of negotiations with Alvarez Holdings, and the softer, more dangerous edge of stolen moments with Theodore. Her phone buzzed. A message. Dinner in an hour. Or something that will make Madrid jealous. She shook her head, smiling despite herself. It was impossible. Impossible and irresistible. An hour later, when she walked into the restaurant where he was waiting, Mara caught the way Theodore's eyes darkened as they swept over her. The look was quick, almost imperceptible, but it spoke volumes. And though the night was filled with talk of contracts and strategy, there was an undercurrent thrumming between them, something neither papers nor numbers could contain. As she lifted her glass of Rioja, meeting his gaze across the table, she realized something she hadn't dared admit before. Madrid was not the only fire she would have to survive. Theodore Hastings was his own inferno. The conference room at Alvarez Holdings was a cathedral of glass and light. Floor-to-ceiling windows opened onto Madrid's skyline, casting golden rays across the polished mahogany table. Mara took her seat beside Theodore, arranging her notes with practiced calm, though she could feel the weight of attention shift the moment their host entered. Alejandro Alvarez was everything one expected from a Spanish magnate, tall, charismatic, with dark eyes that held the confidence of a man accustomed to admiration. He crossed the room with a smile designed to disarm, extending a hand first to Theodore, then lingering a fraction too long on Mara. "Senor Hastings," he said smoothly, "welcome to Madrid. And this must be your brilliant assistant I've heard so much about." Mara returned the handshake politely. "Mara Barnes. A pleasure, Mr. Alvarez." "The pleasure is mine," he replied, his gaze sweeping over her with appreciation that was far from subtle. "I must confess I was expecting numbers and contracts today. Instead, I find beauty and intelligence at my table. Fortune smiles on me." Theodore's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Mara's expertise is precisely why Hastings Enterprises thrives," he said, his voice clipped. "Shall we begin?" They did, though Alejandro's attention wandered in ways that made Mara increasingly uncomfortable. During discussions, he directed questions to her, even when Theodore was the logical recipient. He praised her insights with a charm that might have seemed flattering to an outsider, but to Mara, it felt invasive, too forward, too knowing. "You have a sharp mind, Señorita Barnes," Alejandro said at one point, leaning across the table as though the two of them shared a private world. "Surely you could run a company of your own, rather than remain hidden in someone else's shadow?" Mara kept her tone neutral. "I'm very proud of the work I do here. Theodore and I function as a team." "Ah," Alejandro said, his smile sly. "A team. I see." Theodore's pen snapped clean in half. By the time the meeting concluded, contracts had been outlined and agreements reached, but the undercurrent was undeniable. Alejandro had not been shy in his interest, and Theodore had not been subtle in his irritation. As they stepped into the elevator afterward, Theodore remained silent, his expression carved from stone. Mara glanced at him warily. "You're quiet," she ventured. "Am I?" His tone was deceptively mild. "Yes. Which usually means you're furious." His gaze slid to her, sharp and unyielding. "You noticed how he spoke to you?" She exhaled. "Of course I noticed. He was inappropriate." "Inappropriate?" Theodore's voice hardened. "He was leering, Mara. Disrespecting you and by extension me." She folded her arms, irritation flaring. "I don't need you to defend my honor, Theodore. I handled it." "You shouldn't have to handle it," he shot back. Men like him. Men like you? She interrupted, arching a brow. That silenced him, if only for a beat. The elevator doors opened, spilling them into the marble lobby, but the tension followed like a shadow. Later that evening, they joined Alejandro for dinner at a restaurant tucked into Madrid's historic district. Mara wore a simple navy dress, her hair loose around her shoulders, hoping professionalism would shield her from further scrutiny. But Alejandro was relentless, his compliments flowing as freely as the wine. "You have a rare elegance, Mara," he said smoothly, his Spanish accent turning her name into something dangerously intimate. "It's a shame Hastings keeps you hidden away in an office. Madrid would celebrate a woman like you." Mara forced a polite smile, about to redirect the conversation back to the merger, when she felt Theodore's hand tighten around his glass. "That's enough," Theodore said quietly, his voice steel wrapped in velvet. Alejandro laughed lightly, unbothered. "Forgive me, my friend. I forget that Americans lack our expressive nature. In Spain, admiration is a form of respect. Your respect borders on possession," Theodore snapped. Mara's eyes widened. "Theodore?" But it was too late. The table had become a battlefield and she was caught in the middle. The rest of the dinner passed in strained politeness, with Mara steering conversation back to contracts and timelines while Theodore brooded in silence. When they finally returned to the hotel, the moment they stepped into the quiet of the elevator, Mara turned on him. "You can't do that," she hissed. "Do what?" "Glare at him like you're about to declare war. You made it worse." "He was disrespecting you," Theodore growled. "And I told you I can handle it." Her voice cracked with exasperation. "What I can't handle is you treating me like I'm incapable of standing up for myself." His expression darkened, a storm brewing behind his eyes. "I don't doubt your strength, Mara. But watching him look at you like that," his voice faltered, uncharacteristically raw. "It made me want to put my fist through the table." Her anger softened at the honesty, but only slightly. "That's jealousy talking. And jealousy, Theodore, is poison. Don't you dare look at me like I invited his attention." His eyes snapped to hers. "I would never think that." "Then prove it," she whispered. The elevator chimed, doors sliding open. Mara stepped out first, her heels striking the marble with precision, every movement radiating controlled fury. Theodore followed, but at a distance, his hands clenched at his sides. In her suite, Mara pressed her back against the door, her chest heaving. She wasn't angry because he'd been jealous. She was angry because a part of her had liked his jealousy, liked the proof that beneath his polished exterior, Theodore Hastings cared enough to come undone. But care wasn't trust. And without trust, what did they have? Across the hall, Theodore sat in his own suite, staring at the untouched glass of whiskey on the table. For the first time in years, he questioned his control, not over the boardroom, not over his empire, but over his heart. And the realization terrified him. Madrid shimmered at night, the city alive with music spilling from taverns, lanterns strung across narrow streets, and laughter echoing through courtyards. Mara should have been enchanted. She should have been savoring every moment of the brief getaway Theodore had promised once their meetings were done. Instead, she found herself walking 3 paces ahead of him along the cobblestone street, fury simmering beneath her skin. The evening had been a disaster. Alejandro's flirtations, Theodore's glares, the tension at dinner, it all played on a loop in her mind. She heard Theodore's footsteps behind her, measured, deliberate, as though he were trying to decide whether to approach her or give her space. "Mara," he said finally, his voice low. She didn't slow. "Don't." He caught up in 2 long strides, his hand brushing her elbow. "We need to talk about this." She whirled on him, eyes flashing. "Talk? Or accuse me again? Because if it's the latter, save your breath." His jaw tightened, but he kept his tone even. "I wasn't accusing you." "Yes, you were," she snapped. "The way you looked at me, the way you spoke, it was like you thought I'd been encouraging him." "That's not what I thought," Theodore said sharply, then softened. "It's what I feared." Her anger faltered, replaced with incredulity. "Feared? You're Theodore Hastings. You don't fear anything." He studied her, his expression rawer than she'd ever seen. "I fear losing you." The word struck her like a blow, but she refused to let her resolve crack. "You can't control me just because you're afraid. I'm not your possession, Theodore. I'm your partner, or at least I thought I was." You are my partner, he said fiercely. That's why it infuriated me to watch another man treat you like you were his to pursue. Her chest heaved, torn between anger and something dangerously close to tenderness. Then trust me to shut him down. Because I can. And I did. What I can't do is fight both him and you at the same time. The silence between them was thick, pulsing with everything unsaid. A breeze stirred her hair, carrying the scent of roasted almonds from a nearby vendor, laughter from a passing couple. Life went on around them, oblivious to the battle they waged with words. Finally, Theodore exhaled, raking a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of frustration. You're right. She blinked, thrown off balance. What? You're right, he repeated. I don't trust easily. In business, that keeps me alive. But with you, his voice dropped, almost breaking. With you, it's destroying what I want most. Her heart stuttered. She wanted to believe him, wanted to let the tension melt into forgiveness, but part of her still burned. Then you need to decide, Theodore. Because I won't stay in a relationship where I'm constantly questioned. I refuse to live like I'm on trial for someone else's behavior. His eyes locked onto hers, fierce and unyielding. You won't have to. They stood there, staring at each other in the golden glow of a street lamp, the city's noise a distant hum. Mara's hands trembled at her sides, not from fear but from the weight of her feelings. She loved him, though she'd never said it aloud, and that made every wound cut deeper. She turned away, needing distance. I need air. You're already outside, he said, a touch of dry humor sneaking in despite the heaviness. Her lips twitched unwillingly. You're impossible. I've heard that before, he murmured. They walked in silence for a while, the tension easing slightly with every step. Mara let the rhythm of the city seep into her, the guitar music from a plaza, the warm glow of cafes, the chatter of locals. Slowly her breathing steadied. Theodore broke the silence first. When I saw him looking at you, he shook his head. It wasn't rational. It wasn't professional. It was just human. I wanted to tell him you were mine. She stopped walking, turning to face him. And am I? His eyes burned into hers. Do you want to be? Her breath caught. The question was loaded, dangerous, almost a confession. For a moment she let herself imagine it, being wholly his with no more hiding, no more whispers. But reality crashed back. They weren't just lovers. They were boss and assistant. Their relationship wasn't simple. It could never be simple. You don't get to claim me like that, she said softly. If I'm yours, it's because I choose it. Not because you decided it. Something in his expression shifted then, like armor cracking. He reached for her hand, tentative, almost reverent. Then choose me, Mara. Because I've already chosen you. Her throat tightened, emotion swelling, but she pulled her hand back before it could undo her resolve. It's not that easy. You can't just say words and expect me to forget how you made me feel tonight. His shoulders dropped, the fight leaving him. I know. And I'll spend as long as it takes proving I trust you. But don't doubt this. His voice dropped to a husky whisper. I don't want anyone else. I can't. The honesty in his eyes unraveled her anger, thread by thread, until only exhaustion remained. She exhaled, pressing her palms against her temples. You drive me insane, Theodore. His mouth curved in a wry smile. Likewise. They stood there in uneasy truce, the city pulsing around them. Mara knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. But for now, she let herself walk beside him again, their shoulders brushing as they made their way back to the hotel. Neither spoke of Alejandro. Neither spoke of the argument. But both knew something fundamental had shifted. Beneath the jealousy, beneath the anger, lay something far more terrifying than either had admitted out loud. Love, raw and undeniable, waiting to be spoken. The hotel suite was dark, save for the city lights that streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Madrid glittered outside, alive with midnight laughter and music, but Theodore Hastings barely noticed. He sat in the leather armchair by the window, his tie discarded, his shirt sleeves rolled up, a glass of whiskey untouched on the table beside him. He hadn't spoken to Mara since their walk back. She'd slipped into her suite without looking back, leaving him alone with the echo of her words. You don't get to claim me like that. If I'm yours, it's because I choose it. Theodore leaned forward, pressing his palms against his knees. He was used to control, over boardrooms, negotiations, entire corporations. But with Mara, control evaporated like mist. She had dismantled him with a look, a word, a refusal to bend. And God help him, he loved her for it. The thought stopped him cold. He hadn't admitted it before, not even to himself. Desire, yes. Admiration, yes. But love? Love was dangerous, unpredictable, the one thing he had sworn never to surrender to. His parents' marriage had been a battlefield, each scar etched into his memory as proof of what happened when love curdled into resentment. He had built his empire on the certainty that power and control were safer than passion. And yet, here he was, undone by his own assistant. He closed his eyes, remembering the fire in Mara's voice as she stood her ground against Alejandro, the way she had refused to let Theodore's jealousy diminish her strength. She wasn't like anyone else in his world. She didn't bow to power. She challenged it. She challenged him. Theodore exhaled, rubbing a hand across his face. "You're a fool, Hastings," he muttered aloud. "Completely undone by a woman who doesn't even know what she means to you." A knock sounded on his door. His pulse kicked, but when he opened it, no one was there, only a folded note slipped beneath the frame. He bent to pick it up, recognizing Mara's handwriting instantly. "We'll talk in the morning. Don't brood yourself into a storm tonight." Despite himself, a smile tugged at his lips. Even furious with him, she still worried. That small act, quiet, thoughtful, unshowy, pierced deeper than any declaration. He carried the note back inside, setting it carefully on the table as though it were fragile glass. He stared at it for a long time, the words blurring as realization crystallized in his chest. He was in love with her. Not the way he'd loved before, fleeting and shallow, born of attraction and convenience. This was something fiercer, something that left him raw and unmoored. He loved her laugh, the way it slipped past her composure when he said something outrageous. He loved her stubbornness, how she refused to be swept aside or silenced. He loved her mind, sharp enough to match his, unafraid to call him impossible. Most of all, he loved the way she made him feel human. Not a CEO, not a billionaire, not a man to be feared or admired, but simply Theodore. The whiskey sat untouched. For once he didn't need it. Clarity had sobered him more effectively than any drink. He rose and moved to the window, looking out at the city. Somewhere across the hall, Mara was likely pacing, or writing in that leather-bound notebook she carried everywhere. He imagined her brow furrowed, her lips pressed in concentration. He wanted to go to her, to tell her everything, how wrong he had been, how much he trusted her, how deeply he felt. But she deserved more than words in the middle of the night. She deserved a man who could stand beside her in daylight, who wasn't afraid of whispers or scandal. A man who would choose her openly, no matter the cost. For the first time in years, Theodore Hastings realized he wasn't afraid of losing control. He was afraid of losing Mara. The thought kept him awake until dawn. Mara, meanwhile, lay awake in her own suite, staring at the ceiling. She had expected anger to linger, but instead she felt unsettled. She replayed their fight, every look, every word, and beneath it all, she'd seen something in Theodore's eyes she hadn't been ready for. Vulnerability. Fear. Was it possible that beneath his arrogance and jealousy, he actually cared for her more deeply than he knew how to express? She turned onto her side, clutching a pillow. Part of her wanted to storm into his suite and demand answers. Another part of her wanted to guard her heart. Falling for a man like Theodore Hastings was dangerous. He was her boss, her opposite, a man who thrived on control. And yet she couldn't deny the pull between them. She couldn't deny that when he looked at her, she felt seen in a way no one else had managed. As the city outside finally grew quiet, Mara closed her eyes and admitted to herself what she hadn't dared say aloud. She was falling for him. The next morning, Theodore walked into the lobby of Alvarez Holdings with a composure that belied his sleepless night. His suit was sharp, his expression unreadable, but inside, a decision had been made. He would finish the business here, then he would show Mara, not tell but show, that she was more than a fleeting affair, more than an assistant he happened to desire. She was the woman he loved. And for once in his carefully ordered life, Theodore Hastings was ready to risk everything to keep her. Theodore's private jet touched down in London under a slate-gray sky. Rain streaked the windows, the sort of dreary drizzle Mara usually teased him for despising. But this morning she said nothing. They sat side by side, both lost in their thoughts, the silence between them taut but fragile, like glass waiting to shatter. When the car pulled up in front of Hastings and Company, Theodore felt the knot in his chest tighten. He had made a decision in Madrid, clarity sharpened by jealousy, by Mara's anger, and by the terrifying realization of what she meant to him. Today he would act on it. Mara, however, was less certain. She gathered her bag, her posture professional, her face composed, though he could sense the storm brewing beneath. Their argument still lingered between them, unsaid words hanging in the air. Inside the office, whispers started the moment they entered. The staff weren't subtle. Eyes flickered, heads tilted together, muffled conversations rippled through the open floor. Theodore could practically feel the speculation wrapping around them like smoke. Mara stiffened at his side. He saw the faint flush on her cheeks, the way she pretended not to hear. She hated the gossip, hated being reduced to someone's scandalous curiosity. Theodore stopped walking. Mara turned to him, startled. "What are you doing? We're already late for the debrief." "Later," he said, voice low but steady. His decision crystallized in that moment. He was done hiding. Before Mara could stop him, Theodore strode toward the center of the floor. Conversations halted, keyboards stilled, every pair of eyes turning to him with something between fear and fascination. "Ladies and gentlemen," Theodore said, his voice carrying easily across the room. "There's something I need to say before we proceed with the day." Mara's breath caught. "Theodore," she hissed under her breath, grabbing his sleeve, but he gently pulled free. His gaze swept the office, sharp and unyielding, but his words, when they came, were disarmingly direct. "I'm aware of the rumors circulating. About myself. About Miss Barnes." A ripple ran through the employees, some exchanging guilty glances, others wide-eyed with curiosity. Mara's heart pounded in her chest, every muscle in her body screaming to flee. Theodore continued, his voice measured, deliberate. "Let me put them to rest. Mara Barnes is not simply my assistant. She is a woman I admire. A woman I trust. And," his eyes found Mara locking onto hers, softer now, almost vulnerable, "a woman I love." Gasps broke across the room like a wave. Mara's hand flew to her mouth, her heart stumbling over itself. Theodore didn't falter. "Yes, we are together. Yes, I value her more than any whisper could diminish. And if anyone here thinks less of her for it, they will answer to me directly." For a long, suspended moment, silence reigned. Then, to Mara's astonishment, someone started clapping. It was Evelyn from accounting, her shy smile genuine. Others followed, tentatively at first, then with growing boldness until the entire floor buzzed with applause and laughter. Relief spread like wildfire through the office, mingling with curiosity, shock, even delight. Mara, however, stood frozen. Her chest felt tight, her face hot, her emotions a dizzying whirl between fury, embarrassment, and something dangerously close to joy. When the crowd finally dispersed back to work, Theodore turned to her, expression unreadable. "There," he murmured. "No more whispers. No more shadows." She stared at him wide-eyed. "You," her voice cracked and she lowered it sharply. "You just announced our entire private life to the office." "Not our entire life," he corrected smoothly, though his tone was softer than usual. "Just the part that mattered." Mara wanted to strangle him and kiss him at the same time. "You're insufferable," she muttered, though her lips betrayed a tremor that almost curved into a smile. He leaned closer, his voice low enough for only her to hear. "And yet you're still here." Her cheeks warmed. "That doesn't mean I approve of your theatrics." "Consider it less theatrics," he said, "and more truth. Something I should have given you sooner." Mara faltered. Beneath his arrogance, there it was again, the raw honesty he rarely let anyone glimpse. It disarmed her more than any grand gesture ever could. Still, she crossed her arms, lifting her chin. "If you think a public declaration erases Madrid, you're mistaken." His lips curved faintly. "Madrid will haunt me for a long time, I assure you. But if it taught me anything, it's that I cannot afford to let doubt come between us. Not again." The seriousness in his tone stilled her protests. For once, there was no sharp retort on her tongue, only the heavy weight of what he had just admitted, publicly, shamelessly, with the whole office as witness. She exhaled slowly, some of the tension easing from her shoulders. "You really do know how to complicate my life." "And improve it," he countered smoothly. "Don't forget that part." Her laugh slipped free despite her best efforts, soft but genuine. It startled him almost as much as it did her. For the rest of the morning, the office hummed with renewed energy. Mara endured curious glances and more than one whispered, "I knew it," in the hallways, but instead of shrinking beneath the scrutiny, she found herself standing a little taller. Theodore's declaration hadn't just silenced gossip. It had placed her at his side openly, undeniably. And though she wouldn't admit it aloud just yet, part of her was moved. Deeply. Later, when they retreated into his office, Mara closed the door and leaned against it, studying him with narrowed eyes. "You realize this means war," she said. Theodore arched a brow. "War? Oh yes. You don't get to upend my life and declare your love in front of the entire company without consequences." He leaned back in his chair, smirking faintly. "I look forward to whatever retribution you have planned." Their gazes held, charged with the same mixture of defiance and desire that had drawn them together from the beginning. And though words of challenge lingered on her lips, Mara's heart was unsteady, her mind still echoing with the phrase he had spoken so fearlessly before them all. "A woman I love." She wasn't ready to say it back. Not yet. But as she watched Theodore Hastings, the impossible man who had just bared his heart to the world, she knew she was closer than she dared admit. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, and Mara stepped out into the cool night air. She froze. The rooftop of Hastings Tower had been transformed. Strings of golden lights crisscrossed above, glowing like fireflies against the dark sky. A single table stood at the center, draped in white linen, adorned with candles and a vase of red roses. Soft music drifted from a hidden speaker, blending with the hum of the city below. Mara's breath caught. "Theodore, what on earth is this?" He appeared at her side, immaculate as always in a tailored suit, though without the usual stiffness, his tie loosened, his expression unusually vulnerable. "A dinner," he said simply. "For us." Her eyes narrowed, though the corners of her lips threatened a smile. "On the rooftop? At night? This looks suspiciously like a romantic gesture, and you don't do romantic gestures." He allowed a faint smirk. "Perhaps I've been inspired by my assistant's incessant critiques of my personal life." Mara laughed, shaking her head. "This is insane. And beautiful." He pulled out her chair with old-world courtesy, waiting until she sat before joining her. The city stretched out around them, skyscrapers gleaming like jewels. London had never looked so enchanting. Dinner began with quiet conversation, clinking glasses of wine, laughter over shared memories of Madrid, the good parts at least, teasing remarks about office gossip. Yet beneath the banter lay an unspoken tension, a gravity that neither could ignore. Halfway through the meal, Mara set down her fork and leaned back, her eyes fixed on him. "You realize what you did earlier today was reckless, don't you?" Theodore met her gaze evenly. "Reckless, perhaps. Necessary, certainly. You didn't have to declare it to the entire office." "I did," he said firmly, "because I needed you to know that I am not ashamed. That I will never let anyone reduce what you mean to me to mere rumor." Her heart gave a traitorous flutter. She tried to mask it with sarcasm. "And here I thought you just enjoyed making dramatic speeches." He leaned forward, his eyes steady, his voice quiet but unwavering. "Mara, Madrid showed me how easily doubt can unravel everything. I don't ever want to risk losing you to silence or pride. Not again." Her teasing faltered. For a moment she only stared at him, startled by the raw honesty threading through his words. He reached across the table, taking her hand. "I've been called ruthless, arrogant, impossible. All true. But with you, I am better. You disarm me, infuriate me, challenge me. And somehow, despite all that, I can't imagine my life without you." The world seemed to still. The city lights blurred at the edges of Mara's vision, her throat tightening. "Theodore," she whispered. He squeezed her hand gently, eyes searching hers. "Mara Barnes, I love you. Entirely. Inconveniently. Irrevocably. And if you'll let me, I want to spend the rest of my life proving it." Her heart thundered. She wanted to speak, but emotion choked the words. For a woman who prided herself on quick wit and sharp comebacks, she found herself utterly undone. Finally she laughed softly, blinking away tears. "Do you have any idea how long I've waited to hear you say that?" His lips curved faintly. "I suspected." She exhaled shakily, her voice steadier now. "You're impossible. Infuriating. Controlling. And half the time, You make me want to throw my phone at you. Romantic as ever, he murmured, though his smile widened. But, she continued, squeezing his hand back, you also see me, truly see me. And I didn't think anyone ever would. That's why, against all logic, against every reason to keep my distance. Her voice wavered, but her eyes held his firmly. I love you too, Theodore Hastings. The silence that followed was electric, charged with all the words left unsaid. Then, slowly, he rose from his chair and circled the table. Mara stood to meet him, her heart racing. He cupped her face in his hands, his eyes searching hers one last time, as if asking permission. She nodded faintly. And then he kissed her. It wasn't the fierce, impatient kind of kiss she'd imagined from him. It was slow, reverent, filled with all the weight of promises unspoken. The city faded away, leaving only the two of them beneath the canopy of stars and golden lights. When they finally broke apart, Mara rested her forehead against his chest, her laughter trembling. So this is what a romantic gesture from Theodore Hastings looks like. He brushed his lips against her hair. Get used to it. Dangerous words, she teased. True ones, he countered softly. They returned to the table eventually, but the food was forgotten. The night stretched on, filled with laughter, quiet confessions, and stolen kisses. For once, the world beyond the rooftop ceased to matter. No whispers, no rival associates, no lingering doubts. Only them. And as Mara leaned back in her chair, watching the man who had once seemed so untouchable now gazing at her like she was his entire world, she realized something. This wasn't just the beginning of a romance. It was the start of forever. If this story touched your heart, remember, sometimes the smallest steps lead to the biggest changes. Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe and join us for more stories that prove compassion can change the world.